Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2689 of The Tom Woods Show, the last episode of The Tom Woods Show until I finally get a haircut. We got David Stockman looking very well put together, quite unlike your host here. You all know David, former director of the Office of Management and Budget under Ronald Reagan, U.S. Congressman before that, lengthy and distinguished private sector career after that, and now he doesn't need to do anything. He can just be retired and spend his days playing golf or on the beach, but he is trying to save the American Republic in his spare time. More than his spare time. This is his more or less full-time living over at davidstockmanscontracorner.com, which I highly recommend you check out. And I want to talk about some material that he's been producing over there having to do with a lot of the issues that are facing us right now. One has to do with war and peace, and the other has to do with the Fed and the economy. So you ready to get going, David?
All set, and I've got my haircut already taken care of. So
yeah, you're looking terrific.
Apply that maybe to the budget already. Yeah, thank you. Anyway, yeah, I mean, big things are happening by the day here. So this couldn't be more timely to address these topics.
Well, let me start with this. Oh, I don't know if it was a week or two ago. There, Jerome Powell, Fed chairman, uttered the words that a lot of people in the stock market wanted to hear. And it's just so bizarre, this world we live in, that people are sitting there waiting to hear a particular turn of phrase in a speech from one man. And on that basis, they're going to make investment decisions. You know, I at this point, I've watched investor behavior enough that I think half of them are just petulant children, honestly. I don't know who these people are. But anyway, this was the sentence. In fact, I wrote an email to my list that day saying, the sentence everybody heard today. And here was the sentence buried in the speech. With policy in restrictive territory, the baseline outlook and the shifting balance of risks may warrant adjusting our policy stance. Now, if you're not an observer of this stuff, you would have no idea how profoundly significant that sentence was. That sentence sent everything going upward, because what it means is adjusting our policy stance. What does that mean? It means going back to their old bag of tricks is what it means. Ginning up the economy because that's what they're going to claim the numbers demand of them. They're going to make it seem as if this is a scientific enterprise they're involved in here, David, and they're simply responsive to what the circumstances and the numbers are telling them. So what I would like to ask of you is, you heard that sentence as much as we did. We don't know exactly what it means in terms of degree and in terms of timing, but we do know it means an indication that the policy is shifting. And there are a lot of people who will say, well, great, because with inflation low and the economy robust, what we need is the Fed to stop being restrictive and unleash the economy. I mean, again, it's incredible people speak this way. What's wrong? What exactly, in layman's terms, is wrong with that way of thinking?
Well, you're getting right to the heart of the matter, because it's not really a question of, are the rates too high? Are they too low? Is Powell the wrong guy? Would Donald Trump do better? As I said the other day, the issue is, why is the so-called Eccles building, that's the Fed headquarters, why are 12 people housed there in charge of price control in the financial market from A to Z? And that's exactly what the Fed does. It pegs the rate, and it's totally house-trained the financial system. So now, essentially, the dynamic is driven by traders who are trading the words of the Fed rather than investors and traders who ought to be scouring the planet for information on, the evolving economy and all of the factors that drive it. And in order to properly price securities in the real world. So that's the real problem. It's that we have a Fed-dominated financial market at the heart of capitalism, when what capitalism really needs is efficient, flexible, free financial markets, allocating capital, pricing and valuing securities, establishing interest rates by bid and ask, supply and demand, the ebb and flow of financial and economic activity. So, the issue today is, for all of their claims that they're going to bring, a golden age of new prosperity, the Trump people have missed the elephant in the room, which is a dominating, all-powerful monetary politburo, as I call it, that is exactly the opposite of what we really need. And if they wanted to do something, as I said the other day, don't fire just Lisa Cook. She probably ought to be fired too, the Fed governor who double counted her mortgages, but fire the entire 12-person FOMC, because we don't need 12 geniuses setting prices and rates and financial conditions. We need millions of people, of players with skin in the game, determining all of those kinds of financial decisions on the free market.
But yet, I mean, if we were talking to, let's imagine you were talking to Jim Cramer. Have you ever met Jim Cramer?
Yeah, I have once or twice.
Okay, so everybody knows what we're talking about.
And he's yeah, but if I can just jump in here, he's a perfect example of someone thoroughly house trained over a professional lifetime to essentially view the market through the lens of what the Fed may be uttering today, or what 25 basis point or 50 basis point move it might be making in either direction tomorrow. And that's not a viable system. It's a system that creates bubbles in the financial system, vast bubbles. We know what those are. We've had several crises already this century, but also house trains the politicians to believe that you can borrow with impunity, because in real terms, after inflation, interest rates have been essentially flat or actually negative for the last 2 decades. And so when people say interest rates are too high, well, let's look at inflation. It's running now at 3%. If you look at the 16% trim mean CPI, which is a good, stable, short-term measure, a variation of the CPI, it's running at 3.2%. The federal funds rate is 100 basis points more than that. And 100 basis points in real terms isn't high. If we go back to, the time when Greenspan started this whole nonsense in 1987, the real rate after inflation of the 10-year Treasury, which is kind of the benchmark security, was 6.5%. And I've had a graph in one, which we could show it here in one of my publications of recent days, where I traced year by year the real 10-year Treasury rate over the last 35 years. And it went from 6.4% positive to 1.4% negative today. So, that isn't the free market at work. That isn't the push and pull of a market economy determining the price of debt and financial securities. That's a monetary politburo pegging the rate lower, 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 and lower for 33 years running, and creating a market where you have your example of Jim Cramer basically making calls based on what 12 people are going to do or not do in the next period ahead.
Well, I brought him up because I just thought of him as the typical example of, you know, of
Yeah.
somebody who's not thinking very deeply. He's thinking about his or your portfolio over the next 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, but he's not thinking about the big picture or the role of the Fed or how desirable it is or what the long-term consequences are. He would be the sort of person who would say the Fed needs to lower rates. And I guess my question would be, can you ever imagine a situation in which a Jim Cramer would say the Fed really needs to raise rates now? Would that just be crazy price inflation and then he would say it?
I don't know. I've been following this pretty closely for the last several decades, and I do watch CNBC from time to time, and it's the same old song over and over. No matter what the circumstance, no matter what the conditions or the economic environment, rates are always too high, or they should be lower, or they are about to be lowered. Sometime very soon. So that's what's wrong with our financial system, and unfortunately, Donald Trump is the worst of the lot when it comes to interest rate, low rates. I mean, he's totally out to lunch on monetary policy and rates, and has no clue that you have to look at rates relative to inflation. You have to look at rates relative to financial returns after inflation and taxes. And when you do that, it's very obvious that rates have been way too low, not too high, for several decades now.
Friends, if you care about your liberty and your financial freedom, you need to hear this. From October 10th to 12th, my friend Mikkel Thorup, you know him, host of the Expat Money Show. He's been a guest on the Tom Woods Show several times. He even joined us on the Tom Woods Cruise this year. Well, Mikkel is bringing together top experts from around the world for the Expat Money Online Summit, and it's completely free to attend. You'll learn how to legally protect your wealth, secure second residencies and citizenships, reduce your tax burden, and own property abroad, all to safeguard your freedom. This year's focus is Latin America, where opportunity is booming. Argentina is shifting to free markets under Javier Milei. El Salvador is undergoing a radical transformation, and Panama and Paraguay are offering simple residency programs. A Plan B is no longer optional, it's essential. Reserve your free ticket at expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com.
Let me just throw in one other thing. I mentioned the chart. You could just see it. It's stair-stepping down 6%, 5%, 4%, down to negative 1% in 2024 in real terms. Now, when you ask during that sort of roughly 35 period, what was happening to the balance sheet of the Fed? Well, it went from $300 billion to a peak of $9 trillion. So what we have, this is just hard to imagine someone could justify this, but we have a recency bias. So people really don't ask, where were we 10 years ago, 15 years ago? What longer term path are we on? So if you ask, how do you compare that gain in the balance sheet of the Fed, which is just the money they printed? That's all, the liabilities, the dollar liabilities they printed. Well, it's up 35-fold from when Greenspan took the helm in August 1987. 35-fold. Now, how much has the nominal GDP grown? 5 times. How much has the real GDP grown? 2.5 times. So now think about that. If the money in the system is up by 35 times and the GDP in real terms is only up by 2.5 times, something is way, way, way out of kilter here. We have a rogue money printing monetary Politburo, as I call it, that is, a clear and present danger to long-term capitalist prosperity.
Over at the Contra Corner, you have an article recently that looks at a couple of relatively recent periods in the history of the Fed. We're inclined to think the Fed is the Fed is the Fed. But as you show, there have been, if we look at a couple of different periods in the Fed's history, its behavior has been quite different. Now, obviously, the very, very beginning of the history of the Fed is quite different because nobody at that time anticipated the dual mandate and the semi-economic planning aspect of the Fed. But you argue that there was a period in which the Fed was not actually trying to be the driver of the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there are very different periods. It's always interesting to go back to 1913. You got to start there. Carter Glass was the chairman of the Banking Committee of the House. He was really the legislative author. He basically wanted 12 decentralized reserve banks to do one thing and one thing only, and that is provide liquidity to the banking system, but at a free market rate, and even with a bit of a penalty spread over the free market so it wouldn't be overused and abused. But there was no idea that the Fed was going to be in the economic policy business, that it was going to be targeting a precise inflation rate of 2.00%. In fact, he was a strong believer in the gold standard, and inflation as an issue didn't even cross his mind because the Fed was basically controlled by the gold standard. But they didn't say that the job of the Fed was to make sure economic growth was 3.5%, not 2.9% or something like that, or that the housing starts were not quite where they should be, or that capital investment was lagging, all of this stuff. None of that was there. There was the word reserve, the Federal Reserve. The big word in that was reserve. It was just providing reserves to a banking system that was regulated on the basis of providing a ratio of cash deposits at the Fed to their total demand and savings deposits. So that's where it was. It got off track during World War I, and the Treasury took over the Fed and turned it into an instrument of financing the war. It kind of got lost in the shuffle during the 1930s and the Great Depression. That's another whole debate, about which I think Milton Friedman was totally wrong when he said they didn't print enough money in the early 1930s. The problem was they printed too much during the Great War in the Roaring '20s. And so you paid the price with bad debt and liquidations in the '30s. Then it went back to the business of financing war again during World War II. And then after the war ended, the Fed continued to basically peg the Treasury bill rate and the bond rate at very low sub-economic levels as kind of a carryover from war finance, until it got to the point in 1951 where people recognized the Fed needed to not be an instrument of the U.S. Treasury. So there was a famous event in March 1951 called the Treasury Accord, in which the Fed was freed from its duty to basically monetize the federal debt by pegging interest rates at low levels below the market. It so happens that the guy who organized and orchestrated this accord, which was very important in financial history, was William McChesney Martin, who was an assistant secretary of the Treasury. He was then very soon thereafter appointed Fed chairman, and we had then a period, which I call the golden era of the Fed, in which the Fed basically did its job with a light touch. It did not attempt to macro manage the economy, to the second decimal point on inflation. It did not heavily focus on exactly the unemployment rate or the percentage rate of economic growth. It was basically there as a kind of liquidity backstop for the economy. William McChesney Martin understood the danger of a Fed that printed too much money and created bubbles, because he had been, the president of the New York Stock Exchange during the 1930s, when the whole 1920s bubble fell apart. And of course, he famously said, sort of midway through his tenure, he was chairman 19 years, that the job of the Fed is to take away the punch bowl just when the party is getting started. So the idea that he was going to be cutting rates to help the stock market, or to make it easier to borrow or to goose the economy, was not within his lexicon of what the Fed should be doing. And I point out in the piece that I wrote that during that period, the Fed operated basically with what's called the discount rate. It set a discount rate that banks could borrow at. That rate was usually above the market, and it was very rarely used, but it was not an activist instrument of day-to-day market control, day-to-day pegging of the federal funds rate, and then all of the short-term rates that follow from that, and then the longer-term rates that, in a sense, are driven by the series of short-term rates. So the Fed basically was not in the business of pegging the federal funds rate during that period, the William McChesney Martin period, nor in detailed, heavy-handed macro management of the economy. Martin actually believed that the free market could take care of growth, and that we were still on the gold standard, and that if we adhered to it, inflation would take care of itself. There wouldn't be any or much. And so that proves that there was a period, even in modern times, where the Fed was far less dominant, far less controlling, far less interventionist than it has been since 1987, when Greenspan started the modern area of what I call monetary central planning. Now, in between Martin and Greenspan, you had a very bad Fed chairman, Arthur Burns, who basically was hauled into the Oval Office by Nixon. Nixon said, "Give me money, Arthur, because I got to get reelected in 1972. That's kind of shorthand, abbreviated version, but it's essentially how the inflation of the 1970s got started. And then you had William Miller, appointed by Carter, who had no idea what he was doing. He was sort of in the an industrial conglomerate CEO. And out of desperation, they brought in Volcker, who finally brought inflation under control by 1985. Now, at that point, Volcker had fixed the problem, had gotten the Fed out of the money printing business, had allowed interest rates to find market clearing levels, which were exceedingly high given the high inflation rates at the time, and the excess liquidity that was in the system. But it did cure the problem, and inflation came all the way back to 1% to 2% by the mid 1980s. The economy was growing strongly. It would have been a perfect time to revert to the kind of what I call light touch central banking policy of William McChesney Martin, but instead we got Greenspan. And Greenspan was a total surprise to, let's say, to the world, because earlier in his career, Greenspan had been a gold bug, and he had been a hard money man who wrote very good essays. I'm sure some of the listeners have seen them in the 50s and 60s about how the gold standard was essential in order to keep government contained, because otherwise the central bank would simply become an instrument of financing the public debt, of monetizing the public debt, and we'd be off to the races. Well, he believed that at one point, but by the time he got a big job at the Fed, I think he had become more interested in fame and fortune, let's say, in Washington. And he suddenly thought that the Fed, could run the whole financial system and economy, and then we were off to the races of the 35-year period that I've talked about. So I think it's important that people understand these different phases and periods and the Fed history, and also realize, and Tom, I think this is the most important point, that what the Fed is doing today, what the Fed of Jim Cramer has been told to do by Wall Street and Washington over and over, is not the way it was meant to be, and nor is it the way it would actually function for many years, where we had much better economic performance. As you know, the 1950s and early 60s were the golden age of prosperity in America. We had rapidly rising 2 to 3% a year real household incomes. We had very strong industrial growth. We had trade surpluses. It was a different world, and yet all of that good economic performance and prosperity came at a time when the Fed was trying to stay in its lane and do very little to interfere with the economy or to coax it along and manage it day to day, like it's doing, has been doing for several decades now.
Hey, everybody, I did get the haircut, as you can see. Well, you've heard me talk about crowd health. I use that for my family instead of this insane health insurance policy that was getting more and more expensive. $3,000+ a month. Get out of here. My business partner, Paul Counts, had knee surgery not that long ago, and he's been singing the praises of crowd health. Well, now they have their new Black Swan membership. It's the healthcare alternative for people who want autonomy over their care, their costs, and their lifestyle. So you're ready for those rare but potentially devastating Black Swan events in life. I mean, nobody's really thrilled with their health insurance. Of course, everybody wonders, if something really devastating happened, how much would I be covered? Well, Crowd Health, the health insurance alternative, is offering that Black Swan membership. So we're talking health care for under $100. That includes a team of health bill negotiators, low-cost prescription and lab testing tools, as well as a database of low-cost, high-quality doctors vetted by Crowd Health. And if something major should happen, well, you pay the first $15K, then the crowd steps in to help fund the rest. And of course, as part of the Black Swan membership, you join the crowd, a group of members just like you who want to help pay for each other's unexpected medical events. Black Swan moments might be rare, but good health insurance alternatives shouldn't be. Get started today for as low as just $80 per month for your first 3 months by using code WOODS at joincrowdhealth.com. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out, take your power back. This is how we win. Joincrowdhealth.com, code WOODS. Let's leave the Fed to the side for the moment, even though it looms over everything, and switch gears to something else that you've been writing about, because I want to get your ongoing thoughts about it. And that's the Russia and Ukraine matter. And of course, we had a meeting between Trump and Putin. We had all those European leaders coming to the U.S., and the question is whether we're getting closer to a resolution. And you seem to think there's a possibility that we are. And this matter of security guarantees for Ukraine, there's a bit of a question about, is that simply a fig leaf to give the war hawks at least something? Or is it a poison pill meant to undermine the whole process?
Yeah. Well, if you take the neocons and the war hawks and the bureaucrats who run the military-industrial complex, NATO, and so forth, they see it as a poison pill. You won't get a deal, and we will slog on indefinitely in this proxy war against Russia. But I don't think Trump sees it that way. Now, I don't think his motivation is all that great, and I think he can go way off the deep end on foreign policy. The bombing of the Iranian sites, it was a total mistake. He never should have done that. And he's always huffing and puffing, and who knows whether he's going to invade Venezuela next week or do something else that's untoward. He doesn't have a very sound view on China, for instance. But he does want to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And he somehow thinks if Obama got it, who didn't deserve it, he sure as hell should. And he sees settling the war as a ticket to that. It's very clear. That's what's driving him, day in and day out. And I think he's practical enough. I don't know that he was such a brilliant businessman, but he knows that if something isn't working, you got to try something else. I think that's what he learned, right? His whole, real estate career over those many decades. So I think he's trying to feel his way through to something that Putin can sign up with, and that we will get a resolution sometime, hopefully in the next few weeks or months. Now, what I wrote about was not only would that be a hallelujah, because I mean, we are wasting tens of billions, 150 billion actually, of resources on a proxy war against Russia that we have no national security or homeland security reason to do. And to say nothing of the tens of thousands of lives that have been lost on both sides, and that to say nothing of a country that has been totally destroyed as a result of this neocon, instigated proxy war. But I think, if we can settle that, it'll open up another big avenue that's really important. And that is, all along, we've been told this nonsense that if we don't fight them over there, we're going to have to fight them over here. That if they settle on the territorial dispute by having the eastern provinces, the Donbass, separated out from the rump of Ukraine. If this happens, then Latvia will be next, and then Poland, and then Germany, and then the Benelux, and who knows what. It's all a bunch of nonsense. This is a civil war in a area that's been part of the Russian Tsarist Empire and part of the Soviet Russian arrangement for centuries and centuries. And it wasn't ever meant to be a real country. Ukraine never existed till 1922, when Lenin decided to put some borders around what had been an area called Novorossiya, New Russia. Add that to some parts and pieces that had come out of Poland and Austria, and call it a country that he could, manage in the bloody way that the Bolsheviks ran their empire. So it's ironic that what's been going on since 1991, but especially after the coup in 2014, is that we have been spending massive amounts of treasure, massive amounts of foreign policy capital in order to safeguard the boundaries that were set up by three of the bloodiest communist dictators in world history. Lenin formed the core of what's today Ukraine. Stalin added a bunch of territory in the west and north. And Khrushchev then even added Crimea as a door prize when he succeeded to power with the help of his fellow comrades from Ukraine. He was a Ukrainian. So, the idea that these borders are sacrosanct and that we're spilling this kind of blood and treasure to safeguard the work of, the worst communist dictators in history is kind of amazing. But that's somehow where we are. But Trump has seen through it. I don't say it's because he's done a huge amount of historical research or study or analysis, but somehow he's realized that this is just a civil war. It's a territorial fight, and that the best way out of this is partitioning of a fake country that never existed until the communists created it. So I think we may get there, because it's pretty well established now that the two provinces in the Donbass are going to be detached from the Ukraine. It's likely that the other two provinces along the Black Sea, in part, will be detached, and the other part will stay with the rump, Kherson and Zaporizhia. But the key thing is Trump has embraced a partition, which was a logical solution all the way through. So that sort of leads me to believe that once we get this and we find out that, Putin isn't on the march into the Baltics, he's not uh, fixing to move into Warsaw, none of this is going to happen. It is pure, delusional, warmongering, rhetoric that doesn't address the real world. And I think once it's clear that the whole thing with drawing the line in Ukraine was a mistake, then other things are going to come apart as well. That raise the question: why do we have an empire? We don't need an empire. We don't need an empire to keep Russia out of Europe, because Europeans can take care of it. We don't need an empire to keep Taiwan independent. It's always been Chinese. Let the Chinese work it out one way or another. What we need is a invincible strategic deterrent, which we have. It costs $75 billion a year, a very small fraction, 8% of the defense budget, and a homeland, Fortress America defense of our airspace and shoreline. And the rest of it we can bring home. The empire, the 175,000 troops, the 800 bases, all the alliances and security commitments. All of these things, Tom, what I'm saying is, I think will become a lot more obvious once Trump makes peace in Ukraine and nothing bad happens. I called it, the example of what happens when a tree falls in the empty forest. Does anybody hear it? Okay. What's going to happen is when the Ukraine matter is settled, where is all the bad stuff that's supposedly going to happen? It's not going to happen. And I think when that becomes clear, and when those facts become realities that are even impossible for CNN to ignore, that maybe we'll be in a altogether different ball game on foreign policy. So this is big. This is not just Ukraine. This is the whole bring the empire home opportunity.
I'd love to believe that, David, and maybe indeed it is. It's the issue, of course, is that there are so many people with a vested interest in keeping the thing going, and I wonder. I mean, where can all these people who warned, who mocked Trump for being in the pocket of the Russians?
Yeah,
are they just going to stop talking? I mean, they're going to keep mocking him on some level. Now, you may say, but then they'll find that nothing bad happens. On the other hand, when they got rid of the mask mandate on the airplanes, nothing happened. There was no massive wave of sick people, and it didn't make them admit anything.
Well, right at the moment, but have you seen anybody wearing a mask on an airplane lately?
I know. I guess actions speak louder than words.
In other words, in other words, it became very clear. And people were totally bamboozled. They were totally brainwashed. You can just remember what it was like in the spring of 2020, or even through mid-21 when 2021, when Biden was on the tube all the time saying, get your shot and don't kill your neighbor, because that's what you're going to do if you don't. I mean, that was the environment. But here we are 4 years later, 3 years later, and the whole thing is perished. Nobody talks about it. Nobody, I still have in my, a wallet, a card I got because I took one shot just so that I wouldn't have to hassle with it. And it's a joke. I mean, it should be in a museum. So I think when realities on the ground change in a basic way, it does eventually seep through the mainstream media and all of the vested interests in keeping, the empire going and the war machine going. All of that. Here's what's new: when you see a lot of these young right wing MAGA Republicans giving speeches about peace and giving speeches about how it's none of our business what's going on, in Estonia or even Taiwan. I think things are changing. The Republican Party is slowly being turned inside out. I don't say it's from totally great leadership by Trump, but he's helped it happen. And now we have the America First slogan actually becoming a rallying point for people to say, let's bring the empire home. We can't afford it. We don't need the wars. And I think that's a huge change from where you would find Republicans in 205, who were cheering on Bush the younger, as he stumbled around Iraq and so forth. There's a big change. And now the Democrats are the defenders of the warfare state, but that'll only last so long. And I think the other thing happening here, Tom, is we're getting into such a massive fiscal crisis, logjam, that they're going to finally realize that one place where you can find some real savings in the budget is in defense. And I know you have the military-industrial complex. I don't dismiss for a second the power they have in the process. They own lock, stock and barrel a lot of the members of the Armed Services Committee and the Defense Appropriations Committees. But when the big picture changes, I think we've got a chance here to fundamentally begin to move foreign policy away from empire first. And the slogan "America First" isn't all that great, but it's a hell of a lot better than the idea that we need global alliances and 800 bases and troops everywhere and interventions and all the rest of it.
Hey, gang, if you're like me, you've been watching the Fed inflate the dollar into oblivion while politicians bungle trade policy and rack up historic amounts of debt. You're wondering how to protect what you've worked so hard to build. That's why I want to talk to you about Monetary Metals, a company doing something truly revolutionary with gold. We all know gold is a safe haven asset, but let's face it, most gold just sits there in a vault, not doing much. It holds its value over time, but it doesn't grow. What if I told you there's a way to not only own physical gold, but also earn a yield on it, paid in gold every single month? Well, that's exactly what I do with Monetary Metals. I lease my gold with them and earn an annual yield around 4% in gold, not in paper currency. I keep my ounces, and every month I get more. Think about it. You still benefit from any price appreciation, like what we've been seeing in 2025, with gold pushing past all-time highs, and you also get paid more ounces of gold along the way. That's what makes this model so exciting. It's a genuine breakthrough. For the first time in decades, gold is functioning as a yield-bearing asset, just like in the classical gold standard days. The Fed can print dollars. They can't print gold. It's time to start growing your wealth in ounces, not just hoping for the best with fiat. Go to monetary-metals.com/woods to learn more and see how you can start earning a gold income too. That's monetary-metals.com/woods. All right, I got two quickies left for you. Two quickies, because they're just items that just came up. You may have seen the other day that Trump issued a statement in which he said the CDC is being torn apart over this question of the extent to which Operation Warp Speed was a great success or not. And he said, now we would like to believe that, in effect, the hype was true and that it saved all these lives. But if that's not true, we also need to know the answer to that and how that happened. Now, that, David Stockman, is the closest you're going to get to Trump saying, I might have made a mistake. That is the closest.
Yeah, I know.
That right there.
Yeah, but I think it's very important. Two things. One, he's allowed Bobby Kennedy to really, clean house over there. This is one of the positive things that's happening. This whole business with, exposing the CDC and everything that happens there, and some of the real cretins that were running the place. But Trump did say in that statement, they tell me privately how effective it's been, how wonderful it was, but they won't even give that data to the CDC or to the American public. And I'm going to demand they give it to the public. Well, what's going to happen then is there's no data to give to the public that'll stand scrutiny. And I think it's just another opening that will help, move things in the right direction. So in some ways, with all his nonsense about tariffs, his spending, his big, beautiful bill, which was, an outrage fiscally, we've talked about that. Every now and then, I think Trump stumbles into a positive mode. And on the proxy war in Ukraine, he's doing that, and that can open the door to big time change. And in the case of the carryover of all this nonsense from the Biden era and the COVID policies and so forth, he's also, teaching the public, whether he intends it or not, that the government agencies lie, that sometimes they function as tools are captured by private interests, and you can't believe everything that they tell you in the media or that the government claims to be accomplishing. This is all to the good. Whenever we can get people skeptical of the welfare state, skeptical of the warfare state, we're making headway. And in his own idiosyncratic way, I think Trump is doing some of that. And for that, we need to give him credit.
Well, then one more small thing. Another thing, a fugitive remark from the president. He said very, very recently something along the lines of, Israel's got to end this war. They are getting killed in the PR battle around the world. This can't go on. Now, we've heard this from U.S. presidents so many times. They act as if this is all happening in a vacuum, and they're puzzled as to how it's going on. If they want, we all know that they could put a stop to that anytime they want to, but the pain isn't great enough, apparently. But what do you make of that comment?
I don't think Trump is... Well, I think it's, again, opening the door a little bit. I think it was a strong message to the Israelis and to Netanyahu in particular that his patience is wearing thin, and he's the best friend they've ever had in the Oval Office. But if his patience is wearing thin, they ought to understand they're near the end of the road. Because if we ever cut off the supply of armaments and weapons and spare parts, or stood aside when they're being attacked in the UN, it would be a totally different ballgame for the Israelis. So even on that, I think Trump is, opening the door a little bit to some positive developments. But we'll see.
All right. Your website is David Stockman's ContraCorner.com. One of the longest domain names I have ever heard, but every character you type, you think to yourself, I'm getting one character closer to huge mounds of truth that are about to enlighten me. So David Stockman's ContraCorner.com. I'll also link to it. You can just click on it. You don't have to type anything at tomwoods.com/2689, the show notes page for this particular episode. Is there anything that you have this group of people listening to you now that is on the tip of your tongue, that's bothering you, that you'd like to get off your chest before we wrap up, or are you satisfied?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of good territory, but the thing is, you need to follow the information as it develops day by day and week by week, because there are no black hats and white hats in this battle. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of false starts. Trump is doing some things correctly and a lot of things incorrectly. And what I try to do is give my best insight day to day, week to week, as all of this unfolds.
Yeah, you will know everything that's going on, and you'll know the facts and figures and the numbers to the point where you can steamroll anybody. If you're consistently visiting David and joining him over at David Stockman's ContraCorner.com. David, thanks as always for your time. Much appreciated.
Great to be with you, and we'll talk again, I'm sure.
And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.